Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. Dani Katz is with me. And it is words number 34, and we finally have a guest. It only took 34 iterations of this show for somebody to agree to this madness. So, and the person who chose to try his luck and partake is Mr. David Martin. So, David, welcome. It's nice to see you again. How are you?
Great to see you both again. Lovely to be on this lovely chat.
Awesome. So there's a kind of a weird connection between the three of us that seems funny how it came together. And we may dig in a little bit to that in the afterwards section. But in the main section of the show, the public part, which also, by the way, if you watch this on YouTube and then it disappears, it will be on BitChute. So people go over, there'll be a link in the description box for that. We haven't decided if we're going to put this on YouTube yet or just make a little commercial for this on YouTube and send people over to BitChute. Anyway, because we're just tired of engaging the nonsense. But David, it's been about probably 4 or 5 months since we chatted. I think that when you were on with Randy and I, that started your entire loop of alternative media and then even some more mainstream media appearances. And, you know, it's interesting to me because I've been following your work for almost a decade now. And you're finally getting kind of the attention that I thought your work deserved. You're getting it for something that isn't, I mean, I got interested in you through a totally different pathway, but you are sort of getting some of that attention. Unfortunately, it's for something that's total nonsense. Yeah. Total nonsense. But let's, you know, I just kind of wanted to catch up with you and see how you are feeling about how things have progressed and sort of what it is that you're looking at now. You have a really interesting way, both with your own mind and with technologies that you've created to track all of this kind of stuff. I want to catch up with you on what's going on with that, and then maybe get into some conversation about, like, at this point, with the way things have progressed, what is the best use of our energies and times? Yeah. So that's kind of what we're thinking. So first of all, how are you feeling about the way, like, your work has been received, the way things are going, and just kind of give us an update on, like, what your path has been the last few months since we talked to you?
Yeah, well, obviously the kind of noteworthy segments of the path, as you know, have included a fairly interesting and very visible role on a number of different experiences. Obviously, one of the big ones was working with Mikki Willis in the indoctrination film. That obviously was something that placed the whole conversation around the work that I had been doing on this, actually going all the way back to 2003 when we did our first publications on the whole coronavirus RT-PCR stuff, years before anybody was really paying attention to this, and having the response really be beautiful. The fact of the matter is, you know, Emily and Dani, one of the things I find fascinating is there's been this kind of ongoing narrative of the fact checkers and the censors and all of the kinds of nonsense that have been going on. But the funny thing is, despite the fact that they were really desperate to try to find a way to discredit the material in indoctrination, not a single fact in that film was ever challenged by any part of the media. And not a single fact was ever challenged by any part of the established fact-checking community. And the reason for that is because the facts, in fact, stood for themselves. And it was wonderful to see that. As you know, we had 1.98 million simultaneous viewers when London Real live streamed the debut. We have no idea because obviously all of the online platforms have made the statistics around tracking things impossible to verify. But, you know, it's reasonable to expect that we're in the tens or 20s of millions. I don't know how many views of that film, but it's been spectacular. We've had screenings where we've had hundreds of people in rooms doing the screenings, and it's been a really great experience. And I have to say that combined with my interview on Brian Rose, which was when we broke open the Moderna story and really started pulling back the real nefarious actions of a company who Anthony Fauci placed as a front runner in Operation Warp Speed, where they had no business in being not only a front runner, they had no business being in the game at all. If you go back and you look at their founding in the late summer, early fall of 2010, and you look at the actual first innovations that went into what was called the Moderna business when it got started, they had essentially appropriated technology that came out of a National Science Foundation grant, not a National Institutes of Health grant. And the very first patent, that was actually filed prior to the formation of the company, includes the two investors, the two venture capitalists, who are listed as inventors on a thing that they could have had no possibility of knowing anything about. So this company was built on an illusion. 140 plus patents and patent applications later, the company has violated the federal law put in place with the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980, and they have failed to disclose federal interests in all of the research that ultimately became their patent base. And it was really the link of those two things, the indoctrination film and the Brian Rose video, which has, I think, solidified the fact that this was, in fact, as I said in the film, a commercial exploitation of coronavirus. This was not a pandemic. This was not some sort of public health crisis. This is a way for the CDC, for NIAID and others to commercially exploit a alleged biological material. They're calling it a pathogen. And it was a way for other actors to exploit the cover story of a health scare to get away with horrific things, which is the appropriation of public funds for all sorts of actions that have absolutely nothing to do with the public interest at all, but it's lining the pockets of a very few. That's a long way of saying I've been busy. And it's a short way of saying that, gradually we are seeing the unveiling of more and more and more of these issues that I articulated back at the beginning. We're starting to see even mainstream media asking some really hard-hitting questions. And really in the last few weeks, when we see the wheels start falling off the bus on some of these Operation Warp Speed vaccines, where we're starting to see side effects shutting down trials. And then most recently, I don't know if you guys just saw, but the Eli Lilly case where they've been deleting data off of servers, having errors in their production of antibodies for what's allegedly a COVID-19 antibody thing. The fact of the matter is everything we've been saying, which is this is a money grab by a bunch of companies who are desperately exploiting a falsified event so that they can actually just steal from the public, which is the bottom line. And the complicity of governors who are willing to go along with this scam because it's good for them. They get donations from the companies that are benefiting from emergency use authorizations. And as long as they keep the emergency use authorizations in place through the trumped up numbers that are coming from the PCR tests, which are still not having more positives than they have errors. So the good news is we still are throwing a dart at a dartboard. The fact of the matter is everything that we said back in March and April is materializing kind of exactly the way we said it.
David, I'm glad you, thanks for the catching us up to speed. And I'm glad that you mentioned the London Real interview because you really went into the whole Moderna sham and the depth of criminality there. And I know Brian asked you well, where is justice going to be served? Who's in charge? Is anyone minding the ship? And I think you mentioned Barr, and I'm curious to know, are there people who are minding the ship and who are going after Moderna and who are standing up for just, aside from, people like you who are speaking it, but people with the power to actually put these people in prison, shut them down? Is that happening?
So interestingly enough, I made the observation back in August that we really have to look at the criminal actors. And as I've been very clear on stating, Dr. Chris Elias of the Gates Foundation and Dr. Anthony Fauci of NIAID unquestionably have violated the Clayton Act. Now, whether that violation of the Clayton Act is ultimately something that would rise to the level of a prosecutorial threshold for whoever wanted to look at it or not, the facts on the ground are that they meet the definition of interlocking directorates under the antitrust laws of the United States. And the facts of the matter are those two have committed what is a felony violation in the United States. Now, remember that the technicality of that is they have in fact broken the law. The fact of whether the breaking of the law is sufficient to prosecute them is a matter that ultimately is the domain of attorneys general or U.S. attorneys or the Department of Justice. And the fact of the matter is, William Barr, as I said on Brian Rose, William Barr has the opportunity and has the legal obligation to do something about this, and William Barr has done nothing. Mm-hmm. The FBI has done nothing. And the tragedy in all of this, as you can well imagine, is that not only have they done nothing, but despite numerous communications to the White House, some of which I know directly were transmitted by members of the president's family, the president has done nothing. Now, the tragedy in that, and this is where it gets really problematic for me, is that now we are, 14 days away from D-Day. And the problem that we have is that, as you've seen just over the last few days, President Trump has been much more articulate about criticizing Anthony Fauci, but the way that's being spun now is that it's kind of 11th hour, emotional manipulation of facts. And the fact of the matter is, had he not, basically, he had until, let's say, mid-September, where he could have gone in and had a Fauci arrested, which is what he should do, have Fauci arrested for violating a series of acts that I've articulated for now months, aiding and abetting a foreign entity, illegally trafficking biological material, which is a violation of biological chemical weapons treaties, illegally funding activities during the moratorium on the National Institutes of Health moratorium on gain of function, illegally shoveling, U.S. taxpayer dollars to foreign interests, and then relying on foreign intelligence to bring about the shutdown of the United States economy. There's ample reasons why, if the DOJ actually was paying attention, the DOJ could have done something. And there's ample reasons why the president could have, in fact, distanced himself from the illusion that this is some sort of pandemic, and he could have turned it into the domestic terrorism that it is. The problem is now it's too late. You can't fix this thing now, because the only mainstream media narrative is if he says anything about the illegality of the actor's behavior, it will be spun as a last minute gasp to try to manipulate the election. And so the window closed. And the window closed for the president. I think the window also closed for Attorney General Barr. There is now genuinely nothing that can be done. Now, on the flip side, with what's going on with the Biden family right now, they may self-destruct with, a simple laptop computer. So I'm not suggesting that somehow or another, this is a fait accompli with respect to, Trump falling under the bus because of what Fauci has run. I think Biden may very well self-destruct in the last couple hours here of this campaign. But it doesn't change the fact that the damage that is being done by governors who continue to extend states of emergency, which are far, far, far beyond any state's constitutional construct around what state of emergency is for. The fact that that's going on, and the fact that nobody's disrupting that, and the fact that the DOJ, despite William Barr's pledge to say that he was going to support any actions that were defending the Constitution, William Barr has done nothing. He has sat on his hands and done nothing. And we've got these token amicus filings in the case in Arizona and New Mexico, a couple things. In Texas, I think one or two things. But the DOJ has done nothing around the criminality of what's gone with this domestic terror activity.
Okay, that was a lot. I could probably do 5 hours of show just on basically the things that you just said there. But let me try and see if I can pull out like the most important points. First of all, I want to say that you're adding to your sort of body of work and your information on this all the time. And so during this period of time, I've been pushed into watching interviews with people who I normally who I have distaste for, including Brian Rose, including Robert David Steele, including Sasha Stone. I developed some love for Sasha Stone after your interview with him. The other two still aren't my favorite, but I think the interviews you did with them were excellent. didn't allow them to go into some of their usual nonsense. So congratulations on that. But I think what you're talking about in terms of what happened, like sort of what you laid down with Brian Rose, and then what you sort of tied a loop on in your interview with Robert David Steele that a lot of people not as many people saw because it was just on BitChute, not on a huge platform. But your connection with this whole thing with the Operation Warp Speed and that becoming like making a fool of Donald Trump based on rushing these vaccines and that being the October surprise.
Yep.
What I'm seeing in some ways here is that like what's happening, right? Obviously we had an October surprise with the Biden laptop, Hunter Biden laptop and all this kind of stuff. It almost seems like, and we never have evidence or proof, and in some ways we don't even want it, right? That maybe your exposure of that possible connection and that being possibly the plan to use that as the left, the October surprise against Donald Trump, that was disarmed. Because I'm watching now.
Well, not entirely. I mean, remember, and I hate to do this victory lap, but I'm going to do it because I can.
Do it.
I said that there was going to be a number of patent lawsuits that would be filed to try to block these end game therapies that were allegedly going to come out at or near the time of the election. On October the 8th, what did we see? Well, Moderna comes out with its statement that says it's not going to allegedly assert infringement cases. However, what they conveniently left out of their press release on October the 8th is that there are 3 companies that actually have patent infringement liabilities that they can bring against Moderna. That's October 8th. On October 6th, Pfizer and BioNTech were sued for patent infringement. I said this was going to happen. And as soon as the president got the Regeneron Therapeutics, guess what happened? The day they announced that treatment, they were hit with a lawsuit. I said this very, very early on. I said, just wait. And by the way, the unseen hand of China somehow in this narrative, I don't think is to be dismissed, because and I said this to Robert David Steele, I said this to Brian Rose. The fact of the matter is how perfectly embarrassing to this president to actually advocate for intellectual property and the value of intellectual property and rail against the Chinese for intellectual property theft, which is what was happening in the trade war conversations back in 2017 and 2018, going into the first 2 quarters of 2019. All we heard about was China doesn't respect intellectual property. China doesn't respect intellectual property. Wouldn't it be hilarious, if Operation Warp Speed and all of the NIH, hardcore press on how we're going to get to a treatment runs into the buzzsaw of the president picked infringing parties. And guess what exactly happened? So I called it and it happened. Yeah. Now, the issue is that we now have a situation where we do not know, sitting here right now today, we don't know whether any of the technologies that were allegedly part of what has gone into Operation Warp Speed or the NIH rapid interventions around what's called medical countermeasures, we don't know if any of them are actually going to be blocked by an injunction, because we're sitting on October, whatever we are, 21st right now. They still may be enjoined from being released when they get FDA approval. So this issue is still live. And I think it's safe to say, I believe I was the very first person anywhere on any media in any platform to point out that no one advising the president actually advised him on asking a very simple question. Are the companies you're picking to win actually legally entitled to the technology that they're going to sell? And the answer to that across the board is no. They do not own the intellectual property that they need to actually do what they're selling. And as a result, we still have a high probability that FDA clinical trials being fast-tracked, the data being washed so that it appears that it's safe and effective, which we all know is bullshit. But all of that said, the likelihood is we still could have an injunction blocking the release of something the minute it's ready to go.
So yeah, no, you got all that stuff right. And I guess my thought with it had been is like the perfect storm would have been that like all this stuff sort of starting coming out after he'd already deployed the military to deliver, right?
Yeah.
Like that, it seemed to me that that was what the setup like maybe was going to be. And sometimes, you know, we never know the exact reason why things start to happen, but that you blew the whistle, that you called a certain level of attention, then there's a track record of someone having said, this is so. And one of the things I noticed is your work rarely, if ever, gets taken down because they know that you can prove it. They can take down all of our work who talk about stuff that we can't actually get ourselves all the way back to the root dimension of where something started from, right? But your work rarely, if ever, gets taken down. So I guess my point is that maybe with that thing, like, you know, in the one side's sick minds, the idea was that they probably knew that this Hunter Biden laptop scandal was about to come, and that their battle back for it was going to be having Donald Trump with the military breaking all sorts of laws, deploying vaccines on the streets. At the same time, it's revealed that he has chosen as favorites these companies that have committed fraud, and you know, basically they set that whole thing up. So that sort of like maximum disaster seems to have been averted, which I think is interesting. And I'm watching, you know, because kind of part of the way I scan what's going on is I just read the front page of like Drudge, of Zero Hedge, of various news things, right? And I'm watching this Hunter Biden China connection story now be fought with Trump has $187,000 worth of taxes he paid in China. He must be colluding with China, right? Yeah. There's a lot weaker weapon than the one that you had proposed that possibly that they would, you know, get into the dueling October surprises with here. Yeah. But no, I think ultimately, like the part that's dangerous for the people has not been averted, right? But maybe the maximum catastrophe for Trump, which I have no love for I think, you know what I just realized, guys? I started this recording on the wrong account, and this one has limited time on it. Oof. We might have to like stop it in a segment, and I'll reopen it with the other account. All right.
We can go into the after segment.
We can go into the after segment. Yeah, that's fine. So we have about 10 minutes.
Can I ask a question though, you guys? Since you both mentioned the Hunter Biden laptop situation, does the timing of it not seem particularly cinematically convenient that 3 weeks before the election, they just happened to find this information? So given that, and that Trump and Barr have done nothing to shut down the sham, and like, David, your work is obviously heroic and so important, but so much of it seems like talking about the thread and the weave on the emperor's clothes that don't even exist. So the fact that, you know, so is Trump in on this? Like, is he also one of the bad guys? Is this a giant Israeli psyop or some interdimensional thing? You know, like what's really going on? Yeah,
so you know, it's interesting. I have made it my commitment, Dani, you know this about me. I've made it my commitment to make sure that I comment on things that I have firsthand knowledge of. And that is just, that's just kind of where I've decided to stay, because to be effective and to have a voice that continues to be accessible and heard across this entire architecture, it's been important for me to maintain that position. So I get very careful when I go outside of the what do I have first person experience of. What I will tell you is that I have no first person experience with respect to where Trump is or isn't on a number of these things. I do have exceptionally close friends and connections who have told me that he is more aware of the dimensions at play than appear to be the case on the surface. And I have ample reason, because of my personal relationships with those individuals, to have a high confidence in them, but I don't know whether their confidence is appropriately placed or not. So the question that you're asking for me is also a question. You know, is this some sort of game within a game within a game? The fact of the matter is, I've not seen an enormous amount of evidence of that level of intellectual kind of curiosity or capability, for that matter. So sometimes when I'm being told, oh, this is this is this really complex three-dimensional chessboard game that's being played. I'm sitting there going, yes, but I think they'd struggle with two-dimensional chess, to say nothing of three-dimensional chess. So I do think that there is a game being played. And let me tell you the reason why I'm convinced of that. The DOJ went forward with the antitrust case that they filed against Google, and it came out just in the last couple of days that they're going forward with the antitrust case. And if you watch the interview, that was the interview, I believe it was on CNBC with the CEO of Google, it was very chilling. He sat with icicles, very matter of fact, very calm, obviously well coached for the interview. But what was interesting, and let's just review for the sake of making sure we're clear on this. Violating antitrust laws of the United States is a felony. It's financial penalties and jail time. And he sat there smugly looking in the interview saying, we welcome government oversight. We welcome their inquiry. When was the last time a felon welcomed an interrogation, right? There's no felon on the planet that welcomed an interrogation. And I looked at that and I saw something that I'm sure most people didn't see. Because what I saw who's really calling the shots. Mm-hmm. I saw who is really running the show. Mm-hmm. And I did the show a couple of weeks ago on the Butterfly of the Week with Kim when we did our show on the Social Dilemma film, where I said that film was just a hack job for Silicon Valley. Oh, and it was a very clear deflect move where it was pointing to Google and Facebook, all the while totally ignoring Amazon, totally ignoring Netflix, totally ignoring the companies that are in fact more nefarious in their algorithms than Facebook or Google could have ever imagined. And I said, one of the problems that we have is we have to look at who's really winning. And the fact of the matter is that Google interview was terrifying, because the truth is you have a guy who's the CEO of one of the most powerful organizations on the planet, capable of influencing every outcome of everything that happens on the planet, right? This is not a kind of interesting influencer in the US. Google has the ability to influence the planet. And you've got a guy as a criminal accused individual smiling and saying, I welcome oversight. That is BS, pure and simple. That is somebody who has contempt for every law everywhere, smiling and saying, you guys got nothing on me because I own you.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. And so, Dani, my concern is that this is really not even an indictment of all the crazy, right? This is the theater of the absurd. Hunter Biden's laptop, Donald Trump's China. Listen, none of it even matters, because at the end of the day, what really matters is we are being played as an electorate to believe that our vote somehow matters, when the fact of the matter is what really matters is a few corporations who own 100% of the narrative and have the ability to make sure that that narrative is controlled for their and exclusively their interest alone. So is there an October surprise? No, it's theater. It's theater.
Yeah, right.
I mean, pretty much whichever side wins, they win on a certain level.
Exactly right.
Definitely, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah, whichever side wins, they wins. And we're going to get into some of this in what will now be a more extended afterward segment, because I'm sorry, like I forgot that when you have 3 people, then it changes the time limit if I had used the wrong account. So my apologies. There'll be an extended segment over on Patreon. But, I think what I would like to get into over there, and maybe we can just kind of tease into some of it. There's a couple of things I want to get into. But we're at this place now where we have presented so many facts, so much evidence of financial crime, of crimes against humanity, of outright, testing on human subjects, of all sorts of crazy stuff. And people, people that we love, people in our families, they don't care. That literally, I've heard from some people, well, all that stuff may be true, but just in case the virus is as bad as they say, we better do what they say, right? Everything is just in case, just in case, just in case. And the mind control is so thick that there's a large part of me, you know, sometimes there's the heartstrings that get pulled and want to save the people we love, but there's the other part that says we need to abandon this tactic of trying to prove anything and start figuring out what our plan is going to be, because I don't want to live in the society that is being created by these people's fears and just in cases and all that kind of shit. And so, like, you know, like, instead of just continuing to try and like scoop water out of the boat, like, maybe we just need to jump ship and swim, because those of us who are in this part of the fight, like, we've kept control of our bodies and our minds, and we can actually swim. So at what point do we stop trying to save the people that can't?
Well, let's end with where we're going to start our next segment. When Paul Revere rode from Lexington through Massachusetts somewhere in the middle of the night, and he was riding through the towns of Massachusetts going, the British are coming, the British are coming. The majority of people rolled over in their beds, tapped each other on the shoulder, said, who's the crazy man riding past us in the middle of the night? And whoever was asking the question got the response, well, it was probably an anti-masker, an anti-vaxxer, just shut up and go back to sleep. The majority of people fell back asleep. The majority.
Let's stop there because it's going to turn off. He's going to give you the rest of that sentence on the other side. We'll see you at patreon.com/offplanetmedia. Guys, I'm going to send a new link. All right.